So let's talk fire. This could be a bit of a lengthy one because there is a lot going on here. There's a lot of things that have to happen. Something I can warn you to, the way I'm going about doing this, the render times are horrendous. This is only 1280-720 and it took about 12 minutes on my machine, which is pretty darn powerful, just to render that fire, okay? Looks pretty cool. It is all animated, however, though. So if I scrub this, you'll see it all going up and you know, blowing in the wind and everything else. It looks pretty cool. I haven't got the fire showing down below, but you can see it all coming up and you know, dispersing and whatnot, which looks pretty nice. See if I can show the first event and see if it will actually display that as well. And so it doesn't display it correctly, but you can see if I hit play, then this is the fire. It's blowing around. It's doing its thing. And, you know, it's creating smoke that is then kind of lingering, and everything fades away in the render and should just fade off and not just sort of clip off as you're seeing in the viewport. You know, so this is going to take some time, so buckle in. Let's see how many people actually watch this tutorial. So to get started, we have our height reference, 170 centimeter tall character. We're going to make a fire kind of, you know, yay big sort of thing going on here. I'm going to start with a circle, a smaller circle though, you're going to see. We can turn this into a polygon mesh in all sorts of ways. I mean, an easy way to do it is just use the modifier called poly select, or you can go with the conversion modifier, turn to poly, and what it'll do is it'll make a single-sided poly model for you, and that'll just be a few triangles now. That'll work fine. We're going to stick an array modifier on here, and I'm just going to go in and call that phyllotaxis, and we're going to give it only about maybe 7 of these. I'm just going to bring the end radius down. I'm going to push those out so we've got kind of different spots for it to be growing. Again, you can actually do this by material. You could do it with selections on faces, all sorts of things you can go ahead and do it with. So I'm going to go down to the scale here and just lock X, Y, and Z and give myself some random sizes. So there you go. There's our emitter. I'm going to right click object properties and say don't render. I don't want this rendering in the scene. Okay, so it's not going to show up. 6 on the keyboard, or we can go to graph editor's particle view, and we're going to bring up particle view. So we got to build particle systems. Now I'm going to start with an empty flow, just drag that into the top here, and then I'm going to drag out a birth, and the birth is going to allow us to be able to birth particles. You can think of this as kind of the rendering solution here. I'm going to plug those two together. Okay, I'm going to plug that in. And with the birth, I can then determine how many particles it's going to emit over what time. We'll come back to it. Right now, we can't see particles because we haven't told it where they should emit from. So we're going to go along to position object, not just position, but position object, meaning I want to emit from an object. So I added it to the list. And you can see now as I scrub, I get a bunch of particles showing up on those. So we can go back to our birth now and have a look. So from frame 0 to frame 30, it's emitting particles. Well, I'm going to say, actually, I want my fire there all the time. So negative 100 or so, you know, negative, well, do probably negative 200 maybe. To emit or stop, we'll call it 1,000 frames. Now, I don't want a specific amount, so that's going to slowly add particles. I want to give it a rate. And I want it to emit a rate of particles going on. So those particles are now, you know, slowly being generated over time, and they just keep getting generated. If I make my timeline longer with Control Alt and right mouse button, Control Alt left mouse button is start time, Control Alt middle mouse button slides time, or you can go down to the little wheel here and you can set your times however you like. This is way easier. Control Alt and right mouse button. You give yourself more frames, and you'll now notice that it just keeps emitting particles. So we need the particles moving. So we can do that in multiple ways here, but what's going to be interesting is I'm going to suck them into the air with wind, believe it or not. Okay, and you'll see why as we get there. I'm going to go to Create, space warp, and we're going to go in find wind. So I'm going to create a wind icon, and then I'm going to change it to spherical. And I'm just going to go and move that up above, let's say, where our sort of fire is going to be generated from. Then we're going to add another item here. So we're going to say force. That's going to go down below position. Their order does matter here. Think of it logically. We're creating particles. We're telling them where they are. Then we're going to get them moving. So the force, add this force. And if you look at the particles now, they go screaming down away from the wind. So we actually want a negative wind. So I'm going to take it maybe something like that. It doesn't need to be very fast, but if we hit play now with the question mark key, you'll see it doing some funky stuff. So it's actually sucking the particles in. It's acting more like gravity now. They're kind of exiting out the other side, getting pulled back, and they're just looping all over the place, back and forth like crazy. So let's kill them after a period of time. So we want a delete, and so I'm going to delete them after a period of time. So right now you can see the delete's always deleted them. I'm going to go by particle age. I'm going to take the variation down to maybe 3 or something. And you can see now I can kind of determine how long they live for depending on how high I want my fire. So if I want my fire up here, I can kind of, pull it up to here, okay? So I now have these particles streaming up. With that, I'm going to hit play, and then we're going to start working with some of these. So turbulence, we'll start creating turbulence. A little bit of frequency and pulling the scale way down, maybe something like that. Okay, so 0.02 or something. You can see what's happening now is that it's now sort of looking like it's blowing around with turbulent wind, okay? We can apply other wind modifiers because the force here, you can see it takes multiple forces. So we could be adding gravities and everything else. So now it's kind of sucking them up and it's blowing them away. So I can add more or less frequency to it. I can scale that up and down. And again, it takes some pretty small numbers to get it to do what you kind of want. So let's just get it doing something, kind of blowing back and forth in fire at this point. Now all you're seeing are ticks, and that's because we haven't told the particles what they are at this point. So if I go down and open up like the display here, I can choose what color they're going to be. Maybe we'll make these red because they're going to be the fire. So we're seeing these red dots at this moment. But let's actually look at the geometry that they are. Now, we just see X's. It's because there is no geometry yet. What we want to do is we want to add geometry. We're going to be doing game-like particles, and that is going to be using a shape facing. So I'm going to drag that in and drop it in here. Now, we could probably actually put it below the delete, so it's creating shapes only when it needs to. If you notice, what we have now are these little squares, and they're all pointing up. And it says, hey, look at camera. So we need a camera. I'm just going to give myself a safe frame, call myself maybe about there. Control C for a camera, back to P for perspective, and you can see we've got a camera. I can turn the safe frame off again now. So now what I need to do is go and say none and go and pick that camera. And if you look at all these, when I just touch the time, you can see that they're all pointing towards the camera now. So in that shape, let's just size them all up a bit more and give it a bit more size. And then you can also give them a variation of size. You want to vary things as much as possible. So now we've got these bright red squares flying up in the air. And if I hit play again with the question mark, you can see it just sort of going up and killing these particles. So that's pretty good. Now the birth, it's probably going to need to go up. I'm going to probably crank it to maybe a couple hundred particles eventually, spewing out of these spots. But what we're going to want to do here is start creating a material. So I'm going to open up Material Editor, and I'm going to go in and create a material. Now, something to note, you do not apply materials to particle systems this way as you've been doing. What we want to do is we want to apply it in this event, because there can be infinite number of these events, and essentially we want to be able to change the material as we need. So this is where we apply them. So I want to scrub along, and I'm going to find material static should do it. And, you know, material after the shape kind of makes sense, right? If we've got the shape, then we can put materials on. And I'm going to take the output and I'm going to put that into the none button here. So I'm just going to go and drag and drop as instance. And now you can see that's in there. I'm just going to go call this fire. And so we've got the fire being added into there, and our particles will now be gray, okay? So now to get going on this, we need color change over time, okay? And we need opacity and whatnot. So let's start with the opacity. We're going to use as little OSL nodes that you're used to using as possible. We're using a lot of the old nodes. The reason being is OSL can be slow to calculate under animation. Okay, so I'm going to go in here and we're going to go in and grab, first off, a composite node. So this is the old composite node. I'm just going to hit H. You can see the items here. They were hidden. I have everything hidden by default. And we're going to drop this into the cutout to start with. And for this first one, we're going to go and use a general, and we're going to use a gradient ramp. So gradient ramp. Now this one's pretty handy because gradient ramp actually comes with a radial method, okay? And it's going to create radial particles for us to be cut out. And you can see the center is black right now. I'm just going to drag this end tag right off the end and get rid of it. And then I'm going to flip these over. This will become black. This will become white. Okay, and you can see we have these soft little pieces now. Now, what we also want to do is we want to add some noise to the shape. So another thing the old gradient does that's pretty cool, if I go and dial this up, you're going to start seeing some noise being added in here. Okay, you can see it being added. Now, we don't want it that small. We want it fairly large. You know, so it's kind of just a lump, kind of breaks up our particle, but you can see how the corners are causing problems here. Okay, so it's tiling, the noise is tiling out into the rest of the space. So I'm going to grab another tag here and pull it in until those vanish so that essentially it goes totally transparent here. Make sure that still is indeed black. Okay. And now you can see we can get rid of all those little edges going on. So they're all vanished. Okay. So I'm just going to hit hide on that. Now with the composite node that I added, why do I have a composite node? Well, I can composite another in. So I added another, and you can see layer 2 here. And that layer 2 is going to be a noise. So just under general noise. Okay. And then that general noise is going to composite on top of this gradient, okay? In the composite node, it looks like Photoshop in order. Well, right now in Photoshop, as you can imagine, that would be completely the only thing you see. You don't see the bottom anymore. We're going to use a blend mode, and we're going to say, multiply. And so now it's breaking it up a bit more. So we can now go in and play around with the size of that noise. Now I'm going to go in and change that to explicit map channel instead of world noise and whatnot. And we're going to have to go and take the size way down, like into the point values. And you can even say fractal, break it up a little bit more. Okay. And so you've got that. And then if you want to push high and lows up, you could do that. So you could make it more transparent by pushing the low up. Okay. And it'd break it up a little bit more. Not sure we need that much, but that's starting to look pretty good. So we can composite things together here to get our end result. Now, I also like to pump that in. You'll find it looks better when it gets pumped into the transparency as well. Transparency is the exact opposite of this. So white becomes opaque, okay? You know, think about the word transparency as opposed to opacity. So I'm just going to go out, I'm going to use an OSL node for this. I'm going to go math color, and we're going to use an invert and invert that into the transparency map. And it'll soften it even more. Let's go take a look at what that looks like with the high quality on, and you can see that it softens it a fair bit. Now I can also play around with the output of this by using a color correct probably, but now you can see we've got these particles wisping away here. Okay, so they're going up. And, now that we've done some of that, we can think about the shape facing, maybe size going up a bit more. And you can see that we've got now this kind of what's going to be fire burning up. We can slow it down with our force. And there's even an influence here, or we could go back into the force here and we could slow it down and have it go slower at this point, okay? And then you may have to adjust your turbulence and whatnot as well. But we have that working. Now we want some color. So I'm going to, whoops, we don't want that. 6 on the keyboard, get rid of that. And so the color in the physical material is going to be using something called particle age, maps, general, and we're going to go down and find particle age. And particle age gives us 3 colors. So let's give ourselves some colors to start with, maybe some pretty bright colors, and then maybe something like that it's going to go to. And we're going to plug that into the base color. Okay, it won't show in the viewport, by the way. So at this point, you're going to have to start rendering things. I'm going to go and take this. We're in our camera view. We can see where the smoke is supposed to be. And I'm just going to go and save it. And let's bring up the Arnold render view. I've got it docked at the side here. And let's go and hit render on it. And there's our rendered frame. Now, we're going to get some uglies eventually. And you're going to have to, figure out how to get rid of those. So you can see it's already taken its sweet time to render at 1280. So let's go in F10 and let's take the render size down to about 800 or something, or even 600. We want this to render pretty quick. Now note at this low, it's going to look very soft, is what it boils down to. But at least now we can get some renders out. And sorry, I hit for some reason with this quick render, it won't always render the colors correctly. But now you can see the color of the fire changing. And if I pull that up, you can see sometimes it loses it, and I have to turn it off and turn it back on again. So there's our fire starting to go. I'm not sure it should be that order. I'm thinking maybe it should be turned around the other way, the red and the yellow. So I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to drag and drop one onto the other, say swap, and see what that does. And you can see that it swaps it around. So you can change it around really quick. Now, really, we want to do something with our environment. I'm just going to hit the stop on that and bring open my materials again. And let's go and do the typical maps OSL. And we'll use the environment map. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see which one looks good. Take the output of this and drop it on there. And then I'm also going to go in and do the background color to be some sort of dark gray for now. So let's see what that looks like. And we're seeing some real nasty uglies happening. And what's happening here is Max by default only calculates so many levels of transparency in the render. And this can get really, really, really ugly looking really fast. So what we need to do is go back to our render dialog, into the Arnold setup, and you'll see transparency depth. I think it max is 100, so I'm going to crank it up to 100, and we'll take a look what that looks like. And it should not look so blocky. Now, I think some of this white is happening because of the reflections possibly from the environment. So that environment map may not be very good. Let's go and find a different one. Maybe Epping Forest or Evening Road might be good. Yeah, Evening Roads looks like a little better. Doesn't have the hot white in it. But so now we've got some of that going. Looks like my background color's still a little dark. Maybe something like that will look better. So I'm just going to turn that off. Now we've got some kind of fiery looking bits. You can see it all looking kind of tendrily. If we drag it along, you're going to get the different shapes going. Okay. You know, can look pretty cool. Again, you'll see sometimes the color variation not rendered properly. Why? I'm not sure. But, you know, there we go. I'm going to do it around that frame there. Got an interesting shape going. So to get some particles going for smoke, I'm going to create a new event. Now let's just grab another display here, and we're going to get these particles to kick out to these ones. So the display, let's just display our smoke as light blue now, just for ticks. And we need to get them to come out of here. Now I'm going to use an age test. And age test will allow us to be able to test for the particle's age. I'm going to go and connect that down to there. And you'll see now it's kicking those out. The original particles are dying out too quick. So at what point did we want those to start creating? And what kind of variation do you want it to become smoke? So at some point it starts becoming smoke and it's no longer fire. So now we've got this kicking out and, you know, throwing it up in the air, and it's maintaining the same force that was going on. So we also want the smoke to slow down over time. So over to the space warps again, into a drag node. You can drop that anywhere on the scene, and back to our force, and we're going to add a new force. And that force is going to use this drag. And what you're going to find is the particles kind of go up and just stop by default. So to stop that, we're going to use spherical dampening. I'm going to take these down to probably maybe a value of 1 or 2 or something. We want them to continue moving, but we want them to slow down as they go up. So you can see that slowing down. I'm just going to go in and use the zoom back and zoom back a bit and show those. So we can slow these particles down. It's probably too much. And you can see them just kind of going up and then, you know. So we're going to have to figure that out, play around with some settings to get it to, you know, work the way we want and bundle them up. Now, what's our particles going to be? Well, our particles are going to be shape facing again. Okay. And so we could go in and create that, you know, from here. So we need to go down and we need to say shape facing. And those shape facing are going to be facing what? Well, it's going to be facing that camera again. We can just go into the Scene Explorer to click on that if we want. We're looking for camera right there. And let's go in and show those. So instead of ticks, we're going to open that up. We're going to say geometry. And again, we can then go in and size those up and set them however we want as an initial starting point. Okay, we might want to have them grow over time as well, and we can do that. So let's just take maybe that size down a little bit, and then I'm going to go find a scale. And so there's the scale, not test, sorry. We're looking for scale. There it is. Drop that in. And with scale, we can say instead of overwrite once, relative success, okay, successive. And you'll see if I set it to a value here, they suddenly get very large. Let's set this to 100.2. You'll see them getting larger, okay? So essentially, they're growing over time now. As the particle is emitted, it's then growing the particle slowly over time, and it's getting larger, and then it's going to dissipate on us, and it's going to sort of blend away. Now, same thing, we want a material on this. So I'm going to go and grab a material static again, back to our materials, and we're going to grab this and drag it down, and I'm going to drop that in for the material. And this is going to be the smoke. And with smoke, of course, we want some different colors. So let's do, you know, let's maybe go and do some, you know, gray tones to start with, whatever. It's going to start kind of whitish maybe, I guess. And then it's going to go to, gray tones, and then maybe turn to a blacker color or something like that. Okay, so now with these, we've got, gray particles happening, okay? And we can play around with some of the other settings if we want in material to be able to change up how that smoke looks, the size, the noise that might be used or whatever else. And we're going to start getting some of that smoke. So I'm going to pull it out to maybe here and back to Arnold render view, and let's wait for a render. So as you can see, we got some funky colors on here. Well, those funky colors are because the materials right now are very reflective. So you can see the roughness is there. So we're going to go and get rid of roughness on, or sorry, add the roughness 100%. And let's just turn that render back on, and voila, we have smoke now. So you can start seeing it producing some smoke. So it can look emotional and look a little sort of softer and whatnot. So to do that, we're going to just go and select our camera, and we'll skip into here and we'll say enable motion blur and give it a length of time. We'll just try 1 frame for instance. And back to my render view. I find, by the way, it disappears when I go back and forth. And I have to just open and close that at the bottom, and it brings it back. I don't know why. I don't know if yours does that at school. So now we're starting to get some smoke. Okay, it's starting to look smoky. It's starting to look fiery, sort of, except what we probably could use is some self-illumination. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the color of the fire and I'm going to put it into the emission color, and that will brighten that up a whole lot. So it's going to give us fire now. Okay, so it's starting to look fiery. We could even take this one in if you wanted and go emissive color as well, and it'll kind of flatten it out a little bit more and make it look a little bit more like smoke actually. And it's starting to look a little interesting. Now what I find is that the emissive value is right now is set on both of these to be a fixed number. And so you'll see emissions turned up. Well, let's take another noise. Let's take something like this. I'm just going to shift drag it out. And we're going to use this as our emission map. So where is it going to be emissive? This is just a grayscale map now. So we can use this to be able to control where it's emissive and where it isn't emissive. So the more black that's in it, the less emissive it's going to be in places. Maybe I'll just take that down. Maybe something like that. We'll figure it out as we go along and mess around with some values. And in doing so, we'll start to break up what looks like a solid mass here a little bit more. We can also spread apart the array at the bottom to get sort of a better spread on things. So let's try that. This is a lot of back and forth is what it boils down to. Okay, so we've got the PF source in here, but we need the emitter, which is those little circles that are in there. So I think that was a circle, probably one of the first things made. There it is. And you can see the size of the particles are emitting larger than these. So let's spread these out. And we can actually get sort of a little bit more, going on in the way the fire is looking. It's still all pulling tight to the top. And now you can start seeing you getting these sort of streams coming out. So your particle size will help show that, how far out they're pushed, whole bunch of things. And again, I'd keep these little emitter pieces pretty small. They don't need to be large is what it boils down to. We could probably even take them down to 1, a value of 1 here. And, then the particles are streaming out of more of an individual place sort of thing and not spread out over that surface as much. So we get these lines starting to happen and it's starting to glow. Okay. Now the smoke isn't looking a whole lot like smoke yet. Okay, so we need to break that up maybe some, and it's going to be a bunch of back and forth. Let's take this. We did some break up there. We're going to break it up some more though. I'm going to throw that in for my emissive map again. And for this though, I'm really going to crank up the blacks a little chunkier. And you can see it's starting to look a lot chunkier, and it's looking a little bit chunkier here, you know, sort of billowy. Maybe just using a regular, that's starting to look kind of nice. Size of the particle, density of the particle is going to matter. So let's control the density of the smoke. Instead of messing with this, which we could, so we could go in and mess with the density here. Okay, and you can see we can make it less and less dense, which looks pretty good. Okay, maybe we'll just do that. You can also go and throw in a color correct here if you wanted, okay, to be able to do it. You know, and color correct the whole thing. We don't need to touch this one necessarily. It's breaking it up. And then it's the amount, the size of it. So maybe we want those bigger. So the shape facing, let's go up and increase the size of those. And they're going to soften it out a little bit more. And that scale is growing it up a bit more and everything. So it looks pretty good. Back to the texture. Back and forth until you finally get it. It took me a whole lot of back and forth before I started to get what I was looking for. Now, the number of particles could be handy to change up as well. Once they start becoming more transparent, you might want to increase the amount of particles that are actually being created. And we can do that in this event by spawning more particles. So let's take the opacity way down here so you can really see what's going on, and that the density is going to get controlled by that. So let's make them less, you know, a whole lot less. That softens them nicely. But we need to bring up the density now with the number of particles is what it boils down to. So in our event that is, you know, again, we can actually rename this if you want, and we can call this smoke. So we want to spawn new particles from the old particles. So we're going to go along and we're going to find spawn, and it's a test here. We're going to say spawn, and we've got our particles coming in, and I drop it at the very top. And those new particles are going to spawn. 100% of the existing particles are going to make new offspring. We just doubled the amount of particles, by the way. I'm going to say 2, and then I'm going to crank up some divergence, and it's going to spread them out even more. So those particles are now being spread out by this divergence. So it might be too much. Back down again. And then we can even inherit the speed. So with these, we can say, well, don't inherit the speed. These ones should be going slower than the ones that are, you know, first coming out. So I'm just going to hit stop. Ooh, and it looks like I crashed with too much going on. So on the smoke, so there's my smoke. There's my emission map. And let's take this down into some gray tones so that it doesn't make it look too hot is the issue. Should come out looking a little bit nicer, I think. Might need to go down a little bit more. That's what it looks like down at another frame. I'd say my particles are just too big now, probably, by the looks of it. You can see my render times are crunching, and we may have too many. So I'm going to use the particle spawn, and I want to take that down to a value of 1 again. That'll probably help reduce the amount of them, and then I can play around with things like the scale again, you know, or the original size of them, you know, and maybe take that back down to 20 so there's not so many overlapping on top of each other. Yeah, that looked a little bit better. And then let's take the growth of them down, and that'll probably look a little bit better. It's looking a little bit softer. And then, of course, we can also go in and play with the transparency again, right? So of that smoke, you can see we're almost at black sort of thing, and we can play that up and down. Now, that's starting to create our smoke and fire look, but it doesn't look anything like what I had initially. So now what we need to do is add some lighting. So in here, I'm going to go in and add an Arnold light. And so we're going to grab an Arnold light, and it's going to be a point light. And I'm just going to go and stick that in the middle and pull that up somewhere. And with that point light, we can now give it some color that is, like the, we're looking for, and then crank up some light. Now, what are we seeing the light on? Okay, let's create something, a little bit more of a scene. So I'm going to do a plane here. And I'm going to give it a bunch of segments this way. And I'm going to give it a bend. We're going to make a cyc wall. And I'm just going to crank that up to 90. And that way, and that to 90. That looks good. Limit effect on. And push that up. And now I have a cyc wall to look at. Let's see what it looks like in the camera view. There we go. That looks pretty good. I'll just drop physical material on there that's gray, and crank up the roughness so it's not shiny, and we'll make it a darker gray so we've got something to render against. And so now we have some something that's going to take the light and get hit with the light, and we can again find out what that looks like. So that light is starting to give us something that looks good. Let's go and grab the Arnold light and back to our view and intensity. Let's double that up and start casting light out into the scene. So as soon as we do that, it starts looking pretty good. Now it looks like, the way these are looking are starting to, the smoke is starting to vanish. So that might be one of those things where I need to increase the gradient ramp's opacity again, making it look more visible. Okay, so it's a back and forth and a back and forth. Welcome to the world of effects. Okay, I'm going to pull that out maybe. And we're just going to start taking a look at what that's looking like. So that's starting to look fire-ish. Okay, once you got it in an environment now, I've done a few other tweaks and playing around with it, but I think this has gone on long enough. But you can see now I have fire emitting. You can emit from any kind of objects. Could be just a sphere stuck in the top of something or whatever else. But the problem is I like to have those sort of streams of fire coming out. It starts looking a little more realistic, especially if it's coming up through a campfire type thing. So the smoke's starting to look pretty good, but you'll notice my render times at just 600 by 338 are incredibly long. I think it has to do with mostly all of the transparency levels that we've had to turn on to get it to not create really ugly looking messes. You can try turning it down, but you get an ugly looking mess, you're going to have to just turn it right back up again. This will animate, so you could just run an animation sequence on it. It's going to take quite a long time to render, but your flames would be flaming. Okay, best thing to do probably is to render out the particles with no materials and see what their motion looks like, and then start applying the materials to them. So that you have a better idea of what that motion's like before you're waiting on render times like this. Okay, but that's starting to look pretty good. So as the final here, I'll just show you what I've got. You can see that I've got that light going in the middle. Okay, got the smoke. I've got a drag up here that's dragging. I've got the wind that's sucking it up. Okay, my light in the middle. My particle systems look a little like this, or a lot like this, actually, I guess. So it's kind of very similar. I've played with things like speed, though, and whatnot. I forgot to add a delete particle, or maybe I did, don't remember. Delete past an age. Yes, I did add it, of course. But essentially, this is all the same. I did a couple of scale things instead of resetting this as a shape facing. This works as well, so it looks slightly different, but essentially it's the same thing. My materials look like this, so very similar. It is controlling the emission of the base color and whatnot. So I've done some funky things to get this all to work. The transparency map and everything cut out. So one of the things I also did, and I forgot to mention this, is in the composite I added another layer. And that layer is not necessary, so this one can get deleted. But I have a top layer on here, and that top layer is a particle age, and what it's doing is making the particles slowly dissipate over time. So that is going into also my bump map, but it's also going into my transparency map inverted, as well as my cutout map with that color correct I was talking about. And it is multiplied on top so that as the particles get older, they vanish. So they slowly blend out. So at the beginning age, mid age, by 60% of the age, and then at 100% of the age of the particle, it's dead. Okay, it's gone away. So that's something you should also consider for the animation of it. And same thing down here, I have that particle age going in. So there you go. Fire.